Hello and welcome to today's live event of our MOOC, Exploring Possible Futures. Today we want to present and discuss the numerical and the theoretical model example that we have developed here with the case study group at the University of Basel. My name is Hannes White. You should hopefully already know me. I'm the lead educator here for the numerical modeling and I'm professor for energy economics here at the University Basel.
My name is Frank Krzysiak. I think you should know me by now as well. And I'm professor for environmental economics and I'm happy to discuss today the assignment on theoretical modeling.
Hi, my name is Eva Moldavani. I'm doing my master's degree in economics here at the University of Basel. I chose this course because I think it's very interesting how you can take a real-world problem and transfer it in an abstract theoretical model. I'm here today to present the theoretical modeling assignment.
Hi, my name is Rachel Fritz. I'm studying economics here at Basel as well, as Eva already said. And I enrolled in this course because I think it's a pretty big challenge to develop a sustainable energy future and to put that all in a model and see what implications and solution that gives us, I think is very interesting. Today I'm going to represent the numerical team and I'm really looking forward to this hour.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm the mentor of this course. You already know me from the past weeks. For the discussion today, I would like to ask you to like the questions that you might also have, such that I know that these questions really have to be answered by our group today.
We're going to start with presenting the two model examples and we're going to give our feedback and then we later go on to the questions you raised in the last week. And then we also have the possibility to answer live questions that you can comment now. So let's start with the numerical model. As you hopefully have already read, the assignment idea, it's about storage in our future electricity system. So please.
Thank you very much. Well, when we got the task to develop the model, we thought about what challenges do we have in our economy. So one thing that did get in our mind was the challenge of climate change. So what we want to do in our model is design a future that actually can stop climate change. So in our model, we want to look at the future where we take 100% renewables to set the demand of energy. And because renewables, of course, they do not always come as we need them, because the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, so there's a certain uncertainty there. What we put in the model to decrease actually this uncertainty is a storage possibility, as Hannes White already said. So in our model we have an equilibrium model where demand should equal supply, but over time, because of course in the night maybe the sun doesn't shine, but someone wants to put the light on. So what we do in our model is take one day in the future, in 2050, one single day containing of 24 hours of course, and see what kind of energy mix and what kind of capacities for storage do we actually need to get a hold of the demand that's actually occurring. So that's basically what we want to do in our model, and I'm looking forward for what you have to say to this, of course.
Well, if you recall what we discussed in the first weeks of that course, we were starting with an idea, a research question, and then we moved to the second step of designing a model. So let's start with the research idea here. It's about our future electricity system. It's about the role of storage in an interplay with renewable energy. Well, renewable energy seemed to be a good solution if you want to go for sustainable energy supply. But as already said, wind and sun, they're not always there. So we have to come up with an idea, how can we ensure that we always have energy when we actually want it, and not only when it's available. And storage right now is a hotly debated option for that. There's a lot of research going in exactly that direction. So it's definitely a really, really interesting question to answer. Now, you mentioned nicely that you came up with the idea of an equilibrium model, because in the end, supply and demand has to be equal, which defines an equilibrium. And if you recall our lectures about equilibrium models, that's basically the market clearing condition we have. You have supply, you have demand, and attached to that is the market price. So you have the price signal. Then you say, well, there are two options you can have: renewable supply and storage. And they both react to that price. So you basically have two players in the game. The renewable suppliers take the price and decide how much and when to invest in renewables, because the sun is not always there, so you have to take the day prices. Wind may blow in the night, so you can also take the night prices. The storage operator, he has to think about prices across time. So buying cheap when there's a lot of renewable available, and selling more expensive when there's not so much renewable available. So those two players meet on those equilibrium supply-demand game. So following what you learned about whether to choose an optimization or an equilibrium, you can say, well, I have to go for an equilibrium because I have two objectives. But you can actually also do this as an optimization model. If you think in system terms, it's more the question, how much of each of those technologies do I need to actually satisfy that supply-demand balance I need? So you have an objective that is like total system cost that you want to minimize given a specific demand structure. So you can actually design both again, optimization or equilibrium. Starting with your first idea and designing it in that way is most likely the best way to go, because that's your way of thinking. But you can easily switch between the two worlds. We're going to go a little bit more in detail for further questions later on. I would now like to hand over to the theoretical group.
In the theoretical model assignment, we were faced with the issue that we have a firm with market power in the clean technology market. We then looked at the problem that the regulator needs to supply the exact amount of permits in order to achieve the socially optimal amount of emissions. Excuse me. That's our main question. So we want to see how many, I'm sorry. So we want to see, sorry, I start again. So our main question is that we want to know how much the regulator needs to supply in order to achieve the social optimal amount of permits in the market, given that we have market power in the clean technology market. So we have different actors. We have, for once, the regulator. Then we have the firm, innovative firm in the clean technology market. Then we have other firms in the clean technology market who are also producing a clean technology, but which is less effective. So the polluting firms that are producing the consumer's goods are in need for the filters which the clean technology market produces. The polluting firms have different options. One option is to buy the permits in order to emit the pollution. Then they have the possibility to buy the clean technology from either the less effective firms or from the innovative firms, but their price is much higher. So our intuition was actually that we said the regulator is supplying more permits, so the price for the permit goes down, and the monopolist is actually forced to lower its price for the clean technology, so it's getting more attractive for the polluting firms to invest in the clean technology market.
Okay, so thanks a lot for this description. I think you set up the basic setting very nicely. You have polluting firms that are somewhat in the middle. They are regulated by a regulator who wants to reduce their emissions. And to reduce their emissions, they can use new technologies from a clean tech sector. And there are two variants of these new technologies, which is an old one, not so efficient, and a newer clean technology, which is better, more efficient, but perhaps more costly. The setting, I think, is very important, because in environmental policy, we often look not only at reducing emissions, but we also have to look at what are future technologies for reducing emissions. So how can we get bright new ideas, good new filters or other things into the market? I think that's a very important point. And important here is, in particular, that if a firm makes an innovation, it wants to gain profit from this innovation. So it will usually apply for a patent, and then it has a monopoly for this particular technology, and then the price for this technology will be in a certain sense too high because this firm is a monopolist. And what you are going to ask is a question, okay, if this is the case, what should the regulator do? Should the regulator supply more or less permits? One thing regarding your model, and this I think is a very nice feature, that you give firms in the production sector the opportunity to either buy an old technology or the new technology. This will make, I think, the model much more attractive because in a certain way it limits the market power that the innovator with a new filter, with a new technology has. And then one thing I'm happy to see what will the outcome of this model is a question, what would the regulator actually do? I mean, you said your intuition is the regulator should supply more permits to reduce the market power. I think it might come out also totally in the other direction, because imagine a situation where the regulator wants firms to reduce emissions. In this case, the price for the new technology is due to market power somewhat too high, and this implies that firms in the polluting sector, the production sector, need better incentives to abate their emissions. And this might mean we need higher permit prices, or this might imply less permits. But we will see. I'm happy to see what will come out of this model. I'm excited to see this. And now I think we should turn to questions.
I would like to start with the question raised by Kathy. She asks, why should the clean tech industry supply more pollution permits if the objective is to get cleaner energy?
So this already goes in the same direction as you already mentioned. So our idea was that we actually don't only look at the model in one period, but we have different periods. So we start in period 1, that we have our clean technology firm with market power. And actually our goal as a regulator is to end up in perfect competition. And in order to achieve this perfect competition, we want the regulator to supply more permits at the beginning. So the price for the permit goes down and the polluting firms invest in permits. This means the monopolist is, as I already mentioned before, is forced to lower its price to make it more attractive. Now the polluting firm sees that, okay, the price for the clean technology is going down, then hopefully they invest more in the clean technology. And we hope that, of course, this leads to the outcome that also the other firms in the clean technology see that the demand for clean technology is increasing, so they invest more in research and development to make their product actually also more effective, and that we kind of can go to a state where the market power is decreasing for our one innovative firm, and that we end up in a situation where we have perfect competition.
I think this question very nicely addresses a problem that we often face in environmental policy. The question what we should do in the short run versus what is the best outcome in the long run. And in the long run, it's clear we do not only need policy to restrict emissions, we also need new technologies and to abate emissions, to make it more effective, less costly to reduce emissions. So what we often face is a trade-off. Should we at the beginning be very strict, or should we be perhaps a bit more lenient at the very beginning and then become more strict with time regarding emissions? And I think what you just described is really something that we see quite often in our policy, where a new regulation is started with many permits or with a rather low tax for CO2, for example, and then it becomes more stringent over time. And thus I think this question is not really Should we be very strict at the very beginning, but rather what should happen over time?
Then I would like to raise the second question. So Tom wants to know, for example, why the numerical group just chose to have a look at 1 day. Because he says that storage solution will need to take into account daily, weekly and monthly and yearly profiles.
Well, thank you for your question, Tom. This is a very good question, and we ask that ourselves too. So, because as you said, right, it is very important to take a look at seasonal differences between energy demand and supply, of course. So we choose 1 day because we thought the first step, or in the first stage, we just wanted to take a look at a small time space. So we take 1 day, who takes into account the fluctuations of a day, of course, but we will not take a day of winter or summer, but we will take an average day that somehow represents a year as good as it can, of course. And in a later step, if we see the model works, how it does, and see how it actually works, then we can always expand the model to actually a week or a month or a year or even a broader time space. So that's why we defined 1 day in 2050.
That's actually a very, very important point when it comes to numerical modeling. One standard recommendation is start small, go big later. So naturally, if you think about storage, electricity systems, all those fluctuations, you would actually need the whole year, so 8,760 hours. And you would need a lot of those years because the wind can blow quite differently, the sun can shine there and there, so you will need a lot of uncertainty to account for. If you design the model right from the start in that direction, most likely you're going to fail because it's not so easy to do. And if you succeed, most likely you're not really able to trace what is going on there because there's so much elements. And so you start small. Taking 1 day, you have the fluctuation over the day. You have the load structure, then you have a reversed more or less wind profile maybe, and the standard solar profile. And then you can show what's going on in that single day. And if you're able to design that model for a day, you can add a second day and a third. Then you end up with a week. You can play around with different injection scenarios for the week. You can move that week even further so that in the end, you can design a really big model accounting for all that. But you started small to make sure that your model is actually working and you know what's going on. And by extending, you can also see what's the difference. How does it change if I go from a seasonal profile in summer to a seasonal profile in winter? So actually, that's exactly the way to go forward. And I hope it works out with the first day. And then we can go on with further days, further weeks, and maybe end up with a year.
So David wants to know how you, and if you intend to address the question of geographical suitability.
Thank you, David, for the question. Well, we are going to take account of this somehow, and I will explain how we tend to do this. So we will, at the first stage, and this goes in the same direction as with the 24 hours or just taking 1 day, is that we want to focus on one country, in one single country. We probably will take Germany as an example. And of course, Germany is not like any other country, so it depends where we want to take a look or where we focus on our model. So, but to take a look at a broader frame, of course, this has to be taken into account. So what we want to do is start small, as Hannes Weid said before, and then go bigger. So if we take a look at Germany, we will see what kind of renewables are actually suitable or can even be installed. And then if we want to take a look at other countries or even Europe or whatever we want to take a look at, we can expand it to the subject. So of course, if we take a look at costs, this is reflected somehow, because if we want to install solar panels somewhere where the sun never shines, this doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's very costly and doesn't bring a lot of energy actually. So this is somehow taken into account, but again, we want to start at just one single country and then go broader and take a look if that works as well in other countries.
as you already mentioned, it goes back to the same question, what should I take into account in my model? And if you think about storage and renewables, well, there's uncertainty, you need profiles, you need yearly structures, you need some element of the demand in there. You actually have to decide which market you want to look at, so you're just going for electricity here, but you could also think about mobility, about heat, and so on. So if you just make a list of all the elements that are important, you will never be able to model all of them. So you have to focus on something to start with. And when you start with, often you have to leave something completely out, which is okay. You start small, thinking, I focus on the time structure here. Get that one right. If you get that one right, then you can go on. Then you say, well, what does actually change if I account for the geographic potential of renewables? You can think, how can I include that? You're most likely going to have a structure by then, how your model is designed for renewables. So you can think, well, I now have that solar renewable in there. If I go for geographical structure, there's going to be sunny regions and there's going to be not so sunny regions. So maybe I make two solar technologies, one for the sunny region, one for the not so sunny region. Or I take some cost function assumption in there. So again, going step by step, starting small, adding elements on the way, and then basically you have to end at one point where the model may not solve anymore, or where it's just becoming so big that you cannot say anything anymore. That's on the way, a lot of insights you're going to gain. And that's what modeling is about in the end.
So I would like to turn to the theoretical modeling group again. And Katie again asks you if it would be better to enforce the use of the permits and then take separate appropriate measures against the monopoly power.
This would also be approach, of course. I think we have to distinguish in the one setting, it's kind of that the regulator accepts the market power. And the other setting we are actually looking at more is that the regulator is trying to influence the market power and actually wants to go in the direction of a perfect competition. So it's actually two approaches and two intuitions that are behind these questions. And we, in our group, we more discussed that the regulator wants to influence the market power in the first place and then go to the socially optimal emissions output actually in the long run and not in the short run.
Yes, I think that's a question that's rather important, but something we will address in detail in week 6. The question whether we look for a first best solution, which is somewhat what is suggested in this question, just regulate emissions and then choose a different instrument to solve the problem of market power, or whether we just have one instrument available, emission permits, and have to use this single instrument to address both problems at the same time. And if we have to address both problems at the same time, of course we have to make a compromise. And it would be better to do both things, to have two instruments at the same time, but in very many cases in reality we just cannot do this. It's just impossible, politically infeasible to do this. So we have to stick with one instrument often, and therefore I think the question as you posed it is very important.
So coming back to the numerical modeling group, Cesar isn't quite sure if we already have the technology to store a reasonable amount of energy in an economic way, and he asks if you make any comments on the state of art of energy storing technology in your model.
Well, thank you for that question too. We will take some of this question into account in our model or in our description of the model, of course, because we have to decide which storage capacities or which storage possibilities we will take into account in our model. So we will probably not be able to take into account everything that's possible, and we do tend to think that probably today we do not have enough capacity, but this is just a suggestion, or this is just saying what we think. It's not necessarily true. So what we want to take a look is, because it's far away in the future, is just see when we have a structure of energy mix, for example, that we can use in the future, what does that have to say about capacities that are used to be here, and what costs do occur regarding this capacity that needs to be here? So I think we will take into account the question you asked somehow, and we will have to focus on some capacities or some possibilities of storage, but of course we cannot build in everything, and we do not know what happens in the future. So this may be an incentive to see what needs to be done in respect to storage capacities and storage possibilities.
Well, as you nicely mentioned, we don't know what the future is going to look like. That's why we need actually the models to analyze that. If you're going for a more specific topic, typically you have two options. If we stick with storage, there are some storage options out there. You have different batteries, we have hydro storage, which is already used. There's power to gas, maybe there's some hydrogen element. There are a lot of ideas going on. And there's also a lot of research trying to figure out how those technologies are going to develop. And if you go for a long-term perspective, you can actually ask yourself the question, will they play a role? So you take those scenarios provided by someone else, those cost assumptions, those different technologies, plug them into a model and see, will we see them? Which one will we see? In which mix? And how costly will it be? That's one way to go. The other way to go would be saying, well, we actually don't really know all of those different technology options, so let's maybe take a generic one. We know a lot about renewables, design a system with renewables and a generic storage with a specific capacity value, a specific size, maybe even a specific profile, and figure out how cheap or how cost effective it has to become in order to play a role. And then you can compare those numbers and say, well, our model shows that for storage to be included in such a system, it would need to have a cost level of whatever. And if you know that the current cost level is up here, you can at least estimate, well, how hard it may be to achieve that. And thereby providing incentives, so to say, for the engineering researchers, saying, look, if it's just like 80% of the current cost level, we're going to see it. So we're pretty close. If it's 20% of the current cost level, well, we are maybe not that close. Those are like the two ways you can go if you want to go for future analysis. But naturally, 2050, we will never know what's going to be exactly happening there.
So David and Wanika are kind of asking the same question, so I would like to put both of them together. So they want to know if you intend to address the potential environmental implications and hidden costs of the energy storage solution.
Mm-hmm. And we have thought about this too, because we believe this is an important aspect. But we probably will stick to our model the way we have presented it today, and we have presented it in the text file on the internet, because we think in a first step it's important to see how could actually such a future look like. And if we maybe have some idea of what capacities and what energy mix in the case of Germany in our model would be needed, maybe we can then go back a step and see what implications does that actually have for the environment. Do we have to take into account costs, externalities that are not included yet? So we will probably in the first scenario just stick to what we mentioned already, and then of course this could be a whole other question that needs to be answered. In another way, it of course could be implemented in the model as well. If you take the external costs into account and put them on the costs that occur just for producing the renewable energy, of course. But we tend to stick with the first idea that we want to focus on the question that we have raised, and then on the later step this could actually be taken into account and answered as well, of course.
Well, again, the question how to deal with all those elements that play a role in the decision. The points that are raised are basically, well, storage may also not be that clean because it has some environmental impact. You may remember that in this first step of the third week, we had this differentiation between bottom-up and top-down models. The model you design is basically, well, in the end it's just one region, It's just one system, electricity, so it's a pure bottom-up structure, just focusing on a really, really small part of the whole world. You try to get answers for that small system, but that has impacts for all those other elements of the global economy and our society that are beyond that small system. And how to address that? Well, you can't, within just a single bottom-up model, address all those issues. You can think about this as an external effect, so it has a cost. So you can make cost assumptions, adjusting how more costly the different technology options would be depending on their environmental impact. That's something you can plug into your model. Another way would be taking the result of the model, saying, look, if you just have a look at the German electricity market with a lot of renewables and some storage, how many different storage technologies would be installed? Now, what are the environmental effects they're going to have and where they are going to occur? So you're just taking the results of the model and thinking the next steps. What does that mean in another system, in another country? Who's going to produce that storage actually? Who's going to provide the technology? And that's a way where you can maybe combine different models, different bottom-up models. You have a model of the energy system in Europe. You may have a model of the production sector in Asia, Europe, and the US for storage technologies, and feed them forth and back. That's what we call this hybrid modeling, where you try to combine different model approaches focusing on specific elements, and that's also becoming increasingly more important. But you can also go one step further back and say, well, what's the main problem behind? We may have external effects on the production of technology side, so wherever that technology is going to be produced, and that's had feedback effects on the usage of that technology. Well, we're talking about a global market, so basically we would need a global solution. How could a global policy solution look like so that if you produce storage technology in Asia and use it in Europe to satisfy your energy demand, how can you actually achieve that with the current political system? That would basically feed back that question in a more theoretical setting.
Yes, I certainly agree. I mean, the question, I think the question whether we should include environmental effects in such models is, to me, it's often a question: what do we want to do with the results of such a model? Do we want to claim this is the only and very best scenario? Then, of course, we have to do this. Then, of course, we have to include almost everything. But that's usually not what we do in modeling. We do not claim this is the only solution or the very best solution. We just look at possible solutions, possible futures. And there might be good reasons, therefore, not to include certain things. And if you already have a rather complex model, then also include environmental effects might be a bit too much.
So before continuing with the last questions that have been handed in week 3, I would also like to encourage our online watchers to hand in questions, so you can write them in and I would read them out and such that everyone can answer them. So the last question that I would like to ask both groups now is has been raised by Babak. So he wants to know in how far your model captures the real world.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I don't think our model is here to capture like a real world problem, but more to take an idea of the real world and transfer it into a theoretical model. Maybe you can say a little bit more about that.
Sure, I can. I think this is a very, very interesting, very important, and also very old question. What is the purpose of models? Should models really be very detailed, try to capture as much of reality as is possible? Or should we rather go for a more abstract model and try to find out arguments, try to really understand what happens in the model? And I think this is, in a certain level, there's a kind of work sharing between theoretical and numerical models. In a theoretical model, what we try to do is to capture arguments. And what you want to focus on is a question, okay, if there's market power, because we have patents for new technologies, if there's market power in the clean tech sector, what should the regulator do about this? Should the regulators apply more or less permits? I don't think you're going to say it should be 5,232,000 permits. That's not the idea of a theoretical model. Rather, the idea is really to have a sound, robust argument why the regulator should supply more or less permits to handle market power. And the important point here is therefore not to capture everything, to be very close to reality, but the important point is that you end up with a model where you can say it's a credible model. We have good examples of the setting and of our main argument in the real world which fit to our context, which fit to our model. And if you can do this, I think that's a strong achievement, but perhaps the numerical group thinks completely differently.
Well,
Can I start?
yeah.
Well, in our model, it's even, no, I won't say more difficult. It's difficult because we are projecting to really far future. So we're looking at a day in 2050. So we actually don't know what the real world is in 2050. But what we are going to do with our model, which is simplified, of course, it's not the real world as it is, because that would be too complex to actually do a model. But we want to get some implications about what kind of storage possibilities could develop and actually succeed in future to resolve problems with renewable energy. So there are some implications we want to, of course, get for the real world, but the model itself is not a representation of the real world, and it's far away, so this is difficult to answer, I think.
Well, actually, I think you answered it quite correctly, because it is not a model of the real world. It will never be one. But it's still a real world question. So all this discussion about renewables and storage, it's going on for quite some time now, and it's continued to going on for the next years. And if we talk about 2050, we always think, well, that should be the situation where we're going to have renewables and storage all over the place. So we need to get some insight, some ideas, what's going to happen. And even if you stick with your really, really simple, just one day, one representative day, and you take a renewable profile with solar and wind there, you can still get insights about what's going on with storage. You're never going to match that one day in 2050. But you're going to see, well, if that's the development of renewables we see, there are some gaps still to fill in satisfying the demand. So storage could get in. We have different technology options there. Play a little bit around. You can, even with that one day, get a lot of different scenarios going and get insights. How does it interact? What's the interplay between renewables and storage? What is the role of different storage options in that interplay? And as I said before, you can also try to figure out what's the cost level you have here. How further do we need to go down with all that technology? We don't know if that's going to happen, but it provides some insights. What do we need to achieve actually in the real world to make that vision a reality? Because in the end, as you said, you started with you want to have a sustainable energy system. What do we actually understand under a sustainable energy system? Well, different options on that, but if we go for renewables, we need to solve that uncertainty issue. We need to solve that flexibility problem in there. And storage could be a solution, and such a simple model can help to quantify whether or not how far away are we from that solution. So contrary to the theoretical modeling, where it's more about an argument, really understanding the mechanisms, in numerical modeling, it's more about quantifying that argument and quantifying that mechanisms, figuring out where do we stand, where do we have to go to, and is it important? Maybe we figure out, actually it's not a problem. Even with current cost structures of storage technologies, we could have that reality. Then it's not a technical issue anymore. Then it's a political issue. But maybe we figure out, well, we are like 90% away just cost level wise. Then we know it's a pretty long-term way we have to go. And then it's again a political question. Do we want to achieve that? And how can we achieve that? So it's about insights in the end for the real world, because that's where we have to make the real decisions. And those are pretty hard sometimes.
Maybe one last question that Babak also wants to have answered, I guess, is if you're also considering welfare maximization.
Well, what I can say to that question maybe, and maybe it's easier to answer it if we take a look at cost minimizing. Maybe it's more intuitive to understand, because I believe, and you correct me if that's not true, that if we do cost minimizing, this is actually welfare maximizing. So if you have the lowest cost we actually can do, but still meet demand of electricity, I think this is quite welfare maximizing.
Actually, you're correct. It is welfare maximization. The main difference, and that's more a technical issue here, between a cost minimization model and a welfare maximization model is whether or not you treat the demand side as being elastic. If you have a fixed demand that needs to be satisfied, it's just a cost question. If demand reacts to prices, then you're on a welfare question. So that's the more technical issue behind. But going back to this bottom-up modeling structure just in a sector, in the end, you can only say something about the welfare in the German electricity sector, which is not the total welfare. We talk about other sectors as well, other countries as well, so it's not the global welfare. That's again where either the linkage to other models comes, or where the linkage to the more theoretical model comes, where trying to figure out how could mechanisms work that actually take into account the welfare of different actors in the game.
And we are definitely addressing the welfare maximization problem, because at our starting point of our model, we have this monopolist in the clean tech market. And as we know, in a monopoly, the prices are set much higher and the production is much lower than in the actual equilibrium. And with the regulator influencing the market by supplying more permits, we directly fight the monopoly and try to influence the market by bringing the market into a more perfect competition situation where we have an equilibrium in the social optimal output.
Yes, I mean, in a theoretical model, at least when we talk about designing policies, we will certainly look at welfare, trying to find out what is a policy that would actually maximize social welfare. The tricky question here is, and I think that's something Hannes like to put very nicely, the tricky question is, what is the system that we look at? Is it a total economy, the global system? Is it just a part of a small economy? Is it just, well, we're based in Switzerland, a part of the economy in Basel in Switzerland? So what are the boundaries of our system? And in a certain sense, that defines what kind of welfare do we look at. And even if in a theoretical model we write down a welfare function, we always have to keep in mind this is only a function that applies in very many cases to a very tiny part of the overall welfare on a global scale. So I think that's what I would like to add to this question, and as you said, it's a final question. We should perhaps now go to a final round saying goodbye.
Yeah, so I think we ended with our discussion now on economic modeling, because we don't have any online questions anymore. So I would like to thank you very much for handing in the questions in the last week, and I hope to see you in the next weeks again.
Also many thanks from my side. I hope the discussion and also the assignments you have seen shows that modeling is actually not that complicated. You start with your idea, you come up with what is needed for that idea, and keep it simple first. You can always go big and complex later on, but also those simple answers you can provide are answers for real world problems we have out there. And I think the storage question you're going to answer is going to be really, really interesting.
I do hope so. So thank you very much from my side as well. Thank you for all the very good questions that some of them we have had in our mind as well. Others are new to us, and I think this is inspiring and interesting to put in our model or not. So thank you very much.
Thank you also from my side. It was a pleasure to be here. Me and our group, we would very look forward for more questions. So whenever you have feedback or questions to our theoretical model, please comment on the online platform. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you also from my side for joining in today. I think we had a very nice discussion which also kind of nicely showed that the real problem in modeling is not writing down the mathematical equations, but thinking first about what are you going to do. And I think this discussion showed this quite nicely. So thanks a lot for joining in today, and if you have more questions, put them online and we will try to answer them, and I hope to see you next week again. Thank you.